Now we continue with the motion of no confidence against the Ekurhuleni Mayor or plans thereof. Let's speak now to EFF Gauteng leader, Nkululeko Dunga, on the party's stance on this motion. Mr. Dunga, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. So firstly, considering the motion against the Mayor Xhakaza, what would you say is the core issue that's really driving this motion that we are seeing? And what's the EFF's own stance on the matter?
No, thank you for having us. You know, the most unfortunate part is that obviously the discussions find themselves in the public domain without having gone through the at least all the structures where the item would actually find resonance within councils and their respective caucuses. I say this because we are awaiting programming where the motion is going to be tabled, although we are made aware that there is a motion of that nature that has been tabled by, I think, the independent Congress movement along with the ACDP. And in majority, all the concerns that they raise in their own motions have been consistently raised by the EFF itself, you know. The issue of how the particular mayor specifically, in terms of procedures, processes and procedures are not followed through in terms of the finances of the city. You know, the EFF had at one stage taken over the finances of the city, and we did extremely well, you know, even though we were met with a lot of counter propaganda, you know, but nothing has changed ever since the unceremonious removal of the EFF. And if you were to ask us in terms of the issue of the international trips, we are not made aware of. But there is a concern in that the mayor would then leave for a while, be absent, but no one would know who's the acting mayor at the time. I think even about 3 weeks back, I was asking the same question. You know, I was informed that the mayor had gone, and I was asking, but who's the acting mayor? Because there's been no communication to that effect. But if you look at the diplomatic relations with the USA and South Africa currently happening, you ought to be put into confidence, particularly at a council level, in terms of where are you going and what are you going to do there? Because you could be lobbying for things that are counter what we stand for.
Quite interesting you mentioned the fact that you are familiar with council, with the EFF having occupied the office for finance in the city of Ekurhuleni, with you at the helm. But going back to this motion, it does raise concerns about budget delays, for instance, and debt collection shortfalls. What is the EFF's own assessment of the city's financial management, especially considering your background with this office?
We've always known that our budget and the financial state of the city is of recovery mode, particularly considering the COVID era, but also a recovery from the ANC in itself, because when Mondli Ngungubele left, you know, as a mayor in the city of Ekurhuleni, left roughly about 7 billion in terms of cash on hand and reserves to the city of Ekurhuleni. That got extremely depleted, that by 2019, you were sitting at about 3 billion. Today, it's very difficult to even build up a cash reserve in the city of Ekurhuleni because we've got too many expenses. We pay too much in terms of contracted services such as waste collection, cleaning, security, and even to a certain extent, where when the EFF took over, we had to cut off on some of those contracted services such as grass cutting. You know, and also even introduce motions on insourcing of cleaning and security guards. And now I think the security tender is sitting at 50% in terms of capacity, while the other 50% is actually insourced, and we're internalizing that service, you know. So those are just some of the things that we find problematic. Obviously, revenue collection has always been a big problem, but during the 2023 era, we had raised that to about 17 billion rand through the introduction of technology that can monitor, you know, things like your meters remotely and where there are problems, we're able to troubleshoot from a distance and be able to take corrective measures so that we can ensure that there's enough and sustainable revenue collection. Siyacima manje namhlanje campaign brought in a lot of money because debtors of the city amounts to about 25 billion rands that we need to actually go out there and collect. And we had that particular program which was actually doing extremely well. But the challenges still remain revenue collection, particularly in areas where Eskom is supplying directly to communities themselves, where the city is not able to do much credit control. But those are all some of the troubleshootings that we identified as the EFF, and we had resolutions in terms of what must happen. And we keep informing and giving our opinion to council and to the leadership, because we do form part of governance in Ekurhuleni, where we're able to at least sponsor some of the things that we think can be advanced.
Mr. Dunga, while we have this conversation, we've also heard concerns about Ekurhuleni residents having expressed frustrations when it comes to service delivery in the city. What key budget priorities does the EFF then believe should be addressed to improve the situation?
Roads and stormwater. You know, when it is raining, central district areas such as Germiston, Boksburg are no-go areas, because stormwater facilities or stormwater infrastructure has been blocked for the longest of times, and there's extreme levels of flooding that then takes place. So that should be a priority. We also have a lot of potholes that go unfilled for a very long time. The state of our roads is extremely bad. And, you know, Ekurhuleni is one of those municipalities, if you go across the entire province, where they are now literally replacing traffic lights with stop signs. We're regressing from what we've had, you know. And we can allocate, a budget for each four-way stop intersection would cost roughly between 300 to 900,000, depending on the technology that you'd want to put up in those places. So, and following to that would definitely have to be street lights as well, because the absence of street lights is what makes areas prone to criminality, and that is really also the crux of the problem. You know, one of the biggest challenges that we had and continuously have was the prioritization in terms of the budget in itself, where we felt that there should be a lot of money that is brought into fleet management, because the Department of Transport has literally collapsed in the city of Ekurhuleni, and it's at the center of service delivery components. Waste collection requires fleet. Energy, in terms of people being able to go out there, technicians to go and fix outages and so forth, that requires fleet. Water requires fleet in terms of sewage blockages and water bursts and so forth. And they've not been able to meet their performance targets at times as a result of that particular department that does not have money, but does a reallocation of monies and makes sure that they pay about 10 million rands towards the servicing of new cars for MMCs. And that is what we have a problem with.
Mr. Dunga, as we wrap up our conversation, the EFF, like you mentioned, is part of the governing coalition in Ekurhuleni. How does the party then navigate the balance between working with coalition partners, but also ensuring accountability in leadership?
So the EFF has always remained firm in terms of ensuring that there is a government, and a government that is stable, regardless of whether the EFF participates in it or not. You know, and the EFF caucus, and caucuses across the entire province, by the way, whether we're in government or outside of government, we know the voice of the EFF and we know the voice of our constituencies, and there is a balance that we strike between the two in holding even the executive accountable. But the nature of coalition dictates that you thoroughly focus on the departments that you are afforded an opportunity to show that you are in government, and you excel in them. Look at the Department of Water, for example. You know, Commissar Thembi Msane is now heading, and she's championing the water crisis in Gauteng as a result of the interventions of the EFF in that particular department, and it's excelling extremely well. But when we do get into council, we're able to hold everybody to account. As a result of that, that's why you would have found that we were the first people to announce that there's a 2 billion rand that has went missing under the what we call capable ANC government or led Department of Finance rather at this point. So we're able not to ensure that our voice drowns just because we form part of an executive, because that will just be partisan to some of the mishaps that can take place in government, and we're trying to avoid that as much as we can.
As we conclude, just last week, the Council Speaker survived a motion of no confidence. Maybe let's also reflect on that. Do you think these ongoing motions, especially in the city, reflect instability in council? And how does the EFF then approach these shifting political dynamics that we are seeing in Ekurhuleni?
Well, firstly, she didn't survive a motion of no confidence because there was no motion in the first place. It was withdrawn, and it was withdrawn within the standing orders of council. So at no point did we have a discussion on the motion of no confidence against the Speaker of the EFF. But coming back to the issue of instability, yes, it does. That's why we even sponsored, in terms of the standing orders, ourselves rather, was that we can only discuss or debate 2 motions of no confidence, either against the whip, the speaker, or the executive mayor in one financial year. Because we saw with what happened in the city of Tshwane, where every single week you just find people sponsoring motions of no confidence, and that does create instability. But it's not the only source of instability. You know, when you have a mayor like we have the mayor of the city of Ekurhuleni, who outside of coalition agreements and coalition engagements, or co-governance rather, goes out and actively lobbies other political parties outside of what he would have constituted as a co-governance, is an attempt to create instability and a crisis, and then comes back and acts as though that he wants to create stability. I'll give an example. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we were told that the ANC was engaging Action SA, led by the executive mayor, to actually give that particular position to Action SA, the speaker position of the EFF that is currently occupied by the EFF. Is there a crisis in the speaker's office? Definitely not. Why would he do that? He's doing that because he wants to rubber stamp his authority within the greater context of council. But that in itself then creates instability, because now you've got an office that is well managed, that is well run, that has to now reflect on its political engagements on the basis that you have a mayor that has gone into engage other political parties and used you as leverage. You know, even the removal of MMCs requires an engagement. And in the absence of those engagements and holding each other to account, and then you just take unilateral decisions of that nature, creates instability. Not so long ago, the executive mayor had to tabled an item in council that no one knew about, that was procedurally flawed. You know, literally collapsing council. And that's exactly what happened. Council collapsed and everybody walked out. And that creates instability. So more than anything, we are determined to ensure that there is stability of council. And you would have seen, I mean, even with the DA coming in, even with the AIC, and ultimately now the ANC being at the helm of the executive in itself in the city of Ekurhuleni, the EFF has always consistently supported that which is for the people of Ekurhuleni.
To give us some insight into your thinking, and going back to my initial question, will the EFF be rejecting this motion against the Mayor Xhakaza?
The EFF is going to have a discussion. As I said to you, that the item has not found itself in programming yet, so it will be a premature conversation to have, even for the EFF at this point, considering that, I mean, when you look at what you have just earlier on said about the motion against the Speaker, which ultimately did not find itself in council, you would have wasted too much time trying to deliberate on something that might not even find reflection. But be that as it may, our concerns are continuously given to the co-governance structures that we lead and the joint political management forums that we have. And the caucus of the EFF would definitely discuss and debate and deliberate once we get to that point. And obviously the structures of the EFF would have to ventilate in terms of what is the position of the EFF. But as we've said, all the concerns that are particularly raised in that particular motion It's just they get hijacked because would have never been at the center of trying to create instability, and then they find themselves in motions that are sponsored by other people. By the way, the very same people who have sponsored these motions are the same people who have sponsored the motions against the previous mayor of the AIC against the EFF's wishes at the time. Yeah.
Mr. Dunga, thank you so much for your time as this debate over the motion of no confidence in Ekurhuleni Mayor unfolds. I mean, this decision made in council will have a direct impact on governance, service delivery, and the future of the city of Ekurhuleni as well. We'll continue to track the developments and bring you all the latest updates. A big thank you to my guest, EFF Gauteng leader Nkululeko Dunga, sharing his party's insights and perspective on all the happenings in council.